Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into rural Japan for some truly terrifying stories. I would also like to welcome back Jay Nightmares, who actually provided all of the stories in today's video. Don't worry, I narrated half. If you enjoy his stories, feel free to check out his channel. A link will be shown at the end of the video and can be found in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened when I was at university. There was a society dedicated to mountain hiking, and I signed myself up straight away. It had always been a passion of mine. My father used to take me hiking from a young age. We had a transceiver radio in our clubroom. We would check it regularly to see if people were doing okay on their hikes. One of the club members piped up and said, "Hey guys, I'm pretty sure I'm getting an SOS transmission here. What do I do?" We all headed to the radio and gathered around. It was there that we heard the undeniable sound of Morse code being transmitted. The sound of dots and dashes over the crackly radio line. "That's SOS without a doubt," one of the senior members confirmed. Then he set about repositioning the antenna to determine the location of the transmission. The signal was coming from the Joetsu border, and we got permission to use the society's owned car and headed off in the direction of said signal. We didn't have enough information on the situation to call the police, or even know where they were necessarily at that point. We decided we would call them once we'd checked out the situation ourselves. Others opted to join us in their own personal vehicles too, and it took about 3 hours to coordinate the location of the signal. It was coming from a forest area beneath Mount Tanigawa. We parked the car in the parking lot at the visitor's entrance. There were only a few cars parked there as it was a weeknight. We all had a handheld radio with us to help pinpoint the exact location of the signal. We checked it periodically to make sure we were heading in the right direction. The radio started going crazy. It seemed like it was howling at one point. It usually didn't do this, so everyone was surprised. Following the leader of the group, we entered a mountain trail. It was night, and the dense tree coverage made everything dark, but we quickly found a rucksack. We searched for a while longer and discovered a body. It was too late. We got out of the area and made contact with the police. We were all understandably shaken up by this. I mean, we were only university students. We didn't want to leave the forest though. We needed to explain it to the police. None of us noticed until much later, but the radio stopped emitting the SOS signal, and of course, no one doubted that the poor soul who perished in the forest trail was the one who raised the signal. Think about it though. How could a corpse possibly do that? We had this confirmed when the police said that the hiker did not have a radio on his person. What made this even more disturbing for us was the fact that the hiker had died 2 days ago. How did no one find the body in that time on the mountain hiking trail? The police explained all of this in a follow-up meeting with our hiking society. They said that they eventually found a radio, but it was submerged in a nearby stream. So who signaled SOS? The strange thing was that there were a lot of us there, and we didn't see anyone in the area. But that's not to say that someone might have been nearby. Can you imagine someone in the woods and the shadows of it, summoning us to the grisly sight of a murder under the false pretense of an SOS to watch us discover their work? We were there late. We watched all the cars leave that parking lot, and not one was left. That might suggest that someone had taken the body there. This case is still unsolved at this point. Who the hell raised that signal? We talk about that strange night in autumn on most of our society meetings.
This happened back in my university days, when a friend and I were on our way back from a trip. On the way back, I guess I must have misread the map, or we took some kind of shortcut because we got lost somewhere on the mountain roads. My friend was driving, and I was supposed to be the navigator. It was the one job I had. It was around 8 p.m., but it was already really dark since we were in the shadow of the mountains. I noticed a white truck up ahead, and I said to my friend, if we followed the truck, we would probably get back to a main road in no time. I thought it was a pretty sweet plan because I didn't have a clue where the hell we were, let alone what mountain we were on. We were tailing the truck for a while, and then we realized we were going further and further from the main road and further into the desolate mountain roads. We started to worry as the roads turned to dirt roads, one-lane roads. The truck, more suited to these roads, sped up, and we lost sight of it. It was weird and kind of unlikely for the truck to disappear all of a sudden. There was nothing ahead of us apart from dark, dirt mountain roads. It was playing on my mind, but our priority was getting back on a main road. I was flipping through a map with a torch held in my mouth. There was no cell phone coverage. We were going further down the road when I noticed some lights behind our car. I looked in the wing mirror and noticed a white truck behind us. It was the white truck we had been tailing. I told my pal what I'd just seen, and we both watched the truck in the mirrors. We began to get a little creeped out by this. The truck then turned its lights off. Is it even possible to navigate these winding mountain roads with the lights off? I wondered. It was getting really freaky now. I was nervous and I could tell that my friend was nervous too. I stated the obvious at this point. I think that truck from before is behind us, man. It's following us now. As soon as I said that, I began to sweat. My friend shifted nervously in his seat too. He sped up to test my theory, and the truck behind sped up to catch us. Still, with its lights out, we didn't know what to do. We began to argue about it. It was incredibly tense. Then suddenly, the truck behind us seemed to disappear. It felt totally hopeless. Whoever was in the truck clearly knew the roads. I really wish we didn't decide to follow that guy. We kept going forward on the one-lane road, keeping an eye out for a chance to turn back, sending snappy, bitey remarks to each other about how we could get out of this mess. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the truck swerved into our lane again and slammed on its brakes. My friend reacted in time, and once again, we were behind the white truck. He said, "If we don't do something, it's gonna end bad, mate." This was the worst. I've never felt so stressed out. A moment or two later, we reached a point where the road got wider and my friend took his chance. We span into a U-turn. There wasn't too much space to turn, so my friend's car kissed the guardrail. On our escape, we noticed points in the road where the truck could have disappeared and appeared in front of us. That answered the question of how it was possible, but we still had the unanswered question of why. Why was this guy doing this to us? We knew that we were on our way back to civilization, so my friend floored it while I kept nervously glancing over my shoulder to see if the truck was following us. I kept asking him to speed up, but I knew that he couldn't. That truck could pop out of nowhere again at any moment. So we kept heading down those dirt roads until eventually they became concrete again. I saw the lights of people's homes, and before long, we came across a non-franchised gas station. My friend immediately pulled in and we skidded to a halt. My friend ran in and grabbed the clerk by his arm and frantically explained the situation. He asked the guy to call the cops and for directions to get off of these mountain roads. The clerk didn't seem that interested in our plea for help, so we got him to go outside. My friend then said, "You have to believe us, there's some guy chasing us. Okay then, if a white truck with all its lights off turns up at any second, then will you believe us?" And just as he finished saying that, the truck arrived with its lights still off. It screeched to a stop a few meters away from the gas station. Then, it slowly turned around and headed back into the darkness. We weren't able to get a look at the driver, but we noticed something. There was some sort of logo and some text on the side of the truck. The clerk at the gas station said, Oh, now I get you. The guy's from the church, huh?" "What?" "I say church, maybe cult's a better word." I pressed him for more information, and it turns out that apparently the entire mountain is their territory. They own a village, and the leaders and the followers all live there together. I understand that there are cults in Japan, but I didn't understand why that truck was following us. So I asked, and according to the old fellow at the gas station, there are frequent attempts to escape by followers of the cult. who changed their mind. So the cult are very wary of cars getting anywhere near their village. Their reckless driving and relentless pursuits of anyone who gets close to the village is said to be the cause of numerous accidents up here in the mountains. I remember that the cult featured quite heavily on the news and in the media a few years after, but it seems to have gone radio silent since. I guess that guy who followed us was a lookout for escapees, or for families trying to rescue their loved ones or something. It was a very creepy experience.
The following happened when I was a child. My parents and I went on a camping trip with some family friends. There was a big lake by the campsite. It was a very peaceful and secluded area. So we all put up our tents near the river and were set to camp for 2 days. When night came, my friends were talking about doing some dares. The adults overheard us and told us not to do any dares at night as it could be dangerous. Of course, we all ignored our parents' advice. The dare was to walk around the lake by yourself with no flashlight. One of my friends offered to go first. We all waited in silence as she walked off into the darkness. She came back after a while. She wasn't frightened in the slightest. Next was my turn. They urged me forward. I was nervous, and I felt the pressure of my friends. I had to do it. It was so dark. I was getting really worried. I was walking around the lake, only the sounds of nature could be heard. That is until I heard the footsteps approaching towards me. I prepared myself as best I could for whoever was coming towards me. It looked like it was one of my parents' friends. He was working with a flashlight. I knew him. I was relieved. I waved at him as he approached. He strolled towards me. He handed me something. It was a lemon candy. I thanked him. "You should eat that now," he said in a hushed voice. I told him I would eat it later and put the candy in my pocket. He was shining the torch at me. I couldn't see his face clearly. He had his hood up. "Come with me," he said, but it didn't sound normal. I said I had to go back to the tent. I thought it was weird, but he was a really nice guy, and I was enjoying the camping trip with his family and mine. When we got back to the tent, we all decided to get some sleep. I was laying in bed thinking of the candy, and that I should just thank him for it tomorrow, while I held it in my hand. In the morning, I walked over to him while he was drinking coffee and thanked him for the candy. "Lemon candy? What are you talking about? I didn't give you any candy," he said. I thought he was just teasing me, trying to trick me. After a while, I could tell he wasn't joking. He said he wasn't at the lake that night. My mum came out of the tent, who had happened to hear our conversation. It got weirder and weirder. I went back to my tent to get the lemon candy to show them. All the parents and my friends looked concerned and frightened. Who was the person I met at the lake? I threw that piece of candy into the lake as our family picked things up, and we got out of there as fast as we could.
This isn't my story, but one I heard from a member of my caving club. This story is distressing, but I think it serves a purpose, so please hear me out. In Iwate Prefecture, there are numerous caves. Back when this story takes place, it wasn't as touristy as it is today, so many of the caves lay unmapped and partially unexplored because internal surveys weren't often conducted. Back then, survey events were held within the caving community, and this story concerns a very large cave survey on a winter's day. Participants broke up into groups, with the more experienced members of the club trying to map and investigate the cave. There were areas which had already been mapped, and some of the caving club members grew a bit bored of measuring areas of the cave. They were just wandering around at their own pace. They were more interested in taking photos and looking for wildlife. This wasn't a good idea. I guess this is why we are told this cautionary tale when we join the club. One of the cave explorers decided to crawl down a narrow opening in the cave. The others in the club knew, based on the survey, that there was nothing but a dead end. So initially, They weren't concerned. Unfortunately, that changed quickly. We all knew he would go in, find nothing, and probably squirm his way back out backwards, since it was incredibly narrow. But after a few minutes passed, he didn't come back out. We all gathered around and began to panic. We looked at the tiny crevasse he managed to crawl into, and then someone in the club asked aloud, "Is there enough room to turn around in there?" Another chimed in with what we were all thinking. Did he get stuck? There was a sober silence, which was broken by the sound of someone shuffling. He came back out of the crevasse. I cannot tell you how relieved I was to see him. Something was wrong though. He looked jaded and frightened. Not only that, he didn't come out backwards. He came out facing everyone, which we were all sure was impossible. Then he began to mumble about what had just happened in that narrow crevasse. I got to the dead end, but there was something more. There was an even narrower hole. For some reason I poked at it and discovered that the earth beneath the hole could be moved aside. After working at this for a while, I managed to get the hole wide enough to fit both my arms in there. Then, my whole body. It opened up into a reasonably wide chamber. That's how he was able to turn around. He went on. I thought that I had found an undiscovered part of the cave, and I was really excited. I shone my torch all over the cave, and my torchlight fell on something. A doll, I thought, or maybe a mannequin. It was lying on the cave floor, backed into a corner. I had heard of seeing things in caves, stalagmites which appear to look like humans, as well as odd formations of mud on the cave floor. I was aware that my eyes could play tricks on me in the dark too, but none of this accounted for the fact that this human-shaped mass was wearing glasses. So you think it was human? Someone asked. He nodded silently. The caving club left and called the police. Later, the body was identified. According to the police, it was the body of a high school student who went missing a few years ago. He entered the cave with candles and some sweets, so we can establish that he had intent to explore. But for what purpose? Some speculate it was because he wanted to commit suicide. Others say that he just wanted to explore. Perhaps it was his own little secret base. Due to this portion of the cave almost completely shut off, his body had been preserved from the elements. The only issue was muddy water from above had dripped onto the body. One strange thing was, the glasses didn't have a drop of muddy water on them. If you have never been in a cave with no light source, perhaps I can help you imagine what it's like. I've been in caves where I've turned the torch off just for a second. It was so dark I couldn't tell whether my eyes were open or shut. I tried to stay in the dark as long as possible. The longest I could manage was about a minute. I think the everyday, ordinary person could keep their sense of balance for about 10 minutes. After that, you wouldn't know up from down. Then, the mind wanders. The things in the dark, they can tolerate it, but man can't. The sounds, the loss of direction, it all adds up. It all takes a toll. The poor high school boy must have lasted about 30 minutes or so without panic in there. I'm assuming that there was some sort of cave-in which buried the only exit. Then things would have gotten worse. When his matches got wet, or perhaps he couldn't find where he left the candles. At this point, he would have regretted his decision to enter the cave, as there would be no one to hear his whimpers or screams for help. He would be cursing himself time and time again for coming or for not bringing a torch. Maybe even wishing he told someone where he was going. How many times did he trace his hands along the wall, looking for the exit, back and forth, back and forth? How many days did he live? What kind of hallucinations did he see? Unsure if he was awake or asleep, hallucinating or thinking straight. Hunger or thirst, one of those must have come for him towards the end. But not before his mind tormented him further. Maybe he didn't even truly feel like himself towards the end. Maybe his identity faded into the darkness. How many times did he scream, scratch the walls, cry? He would have died without even realizing he was alive or dead. Staring, backed into the corner, hiding from whatever was tormenting him, his glasses resting on his nose, pointing towards the exit he could no longer find. I think this is the most terrifying and tragic death I've ever heard.
This happened when I was in school. It was the summer break. I always loved going to see my cousins during the time off school. My family and I went to visit them, as they only lived in the next city over. I was really looking forward to seeing my cousin. He was a little bit older than me, but he was always up for playing games. Unfortunately, he wasn't always around, so I had to play alone. I didn't mind playing alone since my cousin's house backed onto a forest with a small mountain. It was so great. There was always fun to be had, like looking for bugs, and I decided to go exploring. I really wanted to go to the top of the mountain by myself, so I set my sights on the summit and started marching uphill. But then I noticed a dirt path leading off to the side. I was curious to see what might be there. That's when I noticed there was an abandoned-looking house down there. I immediately thought this would be an awesome place to make a base. My cousin would love it, so I decided to get a bit closer to check it out. I was so excited that I had found it. I crept up close to the exterior of the house and peeked through a broken window to see what was inside. I saw something so weird it will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was all decayed in there, but there was a chair that looked brand new. In front of the chair were these life-size cardboard cutouts of famous people. The way they had been placed made me think someone had deliberately set them up around the chair. There was a baseball player cut out, an anime one, and an actress. The way they were positioned around the chair, it was as if they were in conversation with one another. Looked as if it could have been easy for someone in the chair to be the center of attention. The house was a mess. Broken glass, chipped and damaged walls, but the chair and the cutouts were new. It was kind of off-putting. My gut told me that something was wrong here, so I decided to get back to my cousin's house. My skin went cold despite the hot summer's day. Something innate had awoken in me and was telling me to leave immediately. I began to scramble up backwards towards the mountain path, and that's when I noticed something in the house. I had gotten up the dirt road a bit, and I had a more aerial view of the cardboard cutouts in the house, and one of them stood out to me. It was moving by itself. For some reason I didn't run. It was fascinated, and I stood there watching it, cold sweat amassing my brow, unsure what exactly I was witnessing. I looked closer. My heart paused for a moment when I realized that there was a man hiding behind the cutout. I could see his arms and legs, but not his face. As soon as I figured it was a man, I ran as fast as I could back to my cousin's house, because I was young, and I didn't understand what had happened, or if I would be in trouble. So I decided to keep this incident to myself. If I hadn't noticed the man in there, or my gut instinct was off that day, I might not be alive to tell this story. Who knows? I was so close to walking in there. Now that I am older, I've had time to think about how strange the situation was. What was the purpose of the cutouts? Were they there to lure people? Did the man tell naive people or children that they could meet celebrities if they followed him into the house in the woods? And then, what would he have done to them? I still think about this from time to time.
This happened a couple of years ago in Tokyo with 2 college friends. Mount Takao is a mountain located in Hachioji, Tokyo. It's a popular tourist destination. You can access it from the city center. There's a cable car which takes you up to the mountain, and you get some awesome views of Tokyo. In summertime, there's a beer garden too. But this story takes place on a cold December night in the off-season. The cable car wasn't active, and there was no sign of people around. So we headed up the mountain trail, with our breath fogging ahead of us and our torches in hand. There was no purpose in mind, no idea what we were doing. We had a few beers on board and just wanted to go exploring. Looking back, I think it was all my fault, because I said as we were passing on the street below, "You know what, guys? I haven't even been up that mountain yet." To which my friend replied drunkenly, "Well, we'll change that tonight, buddy." The trail to the mountain was freezing cold, and the muddy ground was hard with ice. Even though we had our beer jackets on and our actual jackets on, we were still cold. The biting wind was relentless. After about half an hour of climbing up the mountain, I had had enough. It was a stupid idea, so I said to my mates, "Guys, who wants to turn back?" I turned to look back, to get a look at what reaction this would provoke, and I saw their red faces and runny noses, and I knew what they would say. "Yeah, we look like idiots," one said, and the other agreed. So we started heading back down the mountain, slipping as we went, laughing at our idiocy. We were in good spirits though, you know? We were making memories. One of my mates slipped on his ass on the way down, and we broke out in raucous laughter. We stopped laughing in unison when we saw torchlights coming towards us. Apparently, there were other idiots interested in climbing the mountain tonight. As we were getting close to the entrance of the mountain trail, the path narrowed again, and we were about to share an intimate moment with the owners of those flashlights. I noted about 5 in total. I counted their flashlights. They looked to be of different age ranges and genders based on their heights and body shapes. As we got closer, I noticed that they were all wearing face masks. This was before COVID, by the way. I guessed it was a family, but I couldn't get any sense of intimacy between them. They walked together in silence. I was about to say hello, but none of them seemed to want to make eye contact. They passed us with their heads down. That's when I noticed something. All 5 of them had a large black plastic bag in hand, like a garbage bag. Weirdos, I thought. My friends seemed to share the same opinion because they stopped and turned around to watch them climb the mountain. We stood there in silence and watched them disappear into the dark shadow of Mount Takao. This encounter slipped my mind soon after. It was only a few days later, or maybe a week later, when I was suddenly reminded of it. I received a link from one of my friends who was with me that night to an online news article. The news was, "A partially skeletonized corpse has been found on Mount Takao." I shuddered when I read the words. The corpse had been cut into 5 pieces. I called my friend, and we spoke about the probability that we might have been on the mountain when that had happened. He remembered those people we passed and asked me if he thought they had anything to do with it. For a moment, I didn't know what he was talking about, but then it came rushing back to me. Those 5 people, wearing those masks, going up the mountain in the middle of the night, in the off-season, holding a black garbage bag each. And the fact that they didn't want to give us any eye contact. We spoke about it for a little while, and we can only assume that we must have passed a family with something to hide.
This happened when I was in high school. My friends and I were all camping together deep in the forest. We had just finished dinner, and we were cleaning up, joking around, when I heard a huge thud. By the expressions on my friends' faces, I was certain they had heard it as well. It sounded as if something had fallen out by our tent. It was dark, so we grabbed some flashlights and went in search of the source of the thud. There was something big and white laying on the ground. It looked like an animal. We were freaking out. We shone our torches at it from a distance. The more we looked at it, the more it looked like a body. A human body. He seemed to have fair or balding hair, and as we approached, we noticed something was wrong. His limbs were bent at impossible angles. We rushed in, realizing the gravity of the situation, and as soon as we got close enough to have a good look, we knew it wasn't a human, but it was as big as. It was a mannequin. Where the hell did it come from? Did someone throw that at us? We scanned the area with our torches, and no one was around. We didn't even hear footsteps or anything when it happened. We were camping, deep in the forest, and didn't see anyone else for the whole day. One of our friends decided to be a watchman, while the rest of us packed up as fast as we could. We got the hell out of there, leaving that creepy mannequin lying face down in the dirt.
This happened when I went camping with a few friends. It got late and everyone fell asleep. I was the last one awake. I thought I was anyway. The campfire was still lit. I was yawning and half asleep in my sleeping bag. I heard the sound of someone stoking the fire, and then I asked, with not much thought, "What are you doing?" I stared in the direction of the stoking sounds and saw someone sat the other side of the fire. I couldn't see them clearly for the fire, but I could see a large, shadowy outline of a person. My field of vision was very hazy. "I'm just watching the fire," a voice replied. For some reason, I wasn't frightened. I should have been asking myself, who the hell was this, and what the hell were they doing at our campsite? We were in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods, and it must have been about 3 a.m. I don't know if that was down to me being half asleep. I felt like I was in a dreamlike state. You know, that perpetual place between consciousness and sleep. I kept speaking to the owner of that voice without any thought process being initiated in my mind. I thought I was asleep for a while. "If the fire went out, what would you do?" "Don't put the fire out," I replied. "Why? What would happen if the fire went out?" It won't go out. "Out here in the mountains, if this fire went out, you wouldn't be able to see a thing, would you?" "Well, if the fire goes out, I guess we'll just have to deal with whatever happens in the dark." "No one knows what's lurking in the dark, do they?" "The darkness is as frightening as it is deep. We never know what's in the dark. That's why we have to keep the fire burning. We've got to take turns keeping the fire burning, keep watch." I don't know what else to call that thing, but I will call it the Lord of Voices. I don't know why that's even in my head. It kept asking me to extinguish the fire, and it kept telling me that it would be fine. "You're already sleepy. Just put the fire out. You'll sleep so peacefully." "I don't want to do that. I'm fine. Just don't worry." "Shall I put the fire out?" "Don't do that. If you put the fire out, I'll just start the fire again. I don't like the dark." "Once the fire's out, it's already dark. There's no use fighting it. You may as well sleep." "It's okay, I have a lighter. I'll keep the fire burning." "How are you sure it will work? You don't need that, just give it to me. If the fire doesn't go out, What use is the lighter to you? Just throw it away. It's not mine, you can't do that. This dreamlike state went on for hours in my mind, but in reality perhaps it was just minutes of some fleeting dream. Although deep down, I know it wasn't a dream. I don't know if I can convince you of that, but this was real. Eventually the shadow rose and began to amble away. It swayed as it moved into the darkness. Then I felt as if I was being shaken. It was horrible. And when I opened my eyes, I was eye to eye with one of my friends from the campsite. I was relieved it was him and not that shadow, the Lord of Voices. "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked. I could only mumble half responses. I was confused myself. I was so confused, but then my thoughts began to make sense. My friends had come out of their tents, and they had heard me muttering alone out there, and they had came to see what the issue was. It was the dead of night and near pitch black, except for the dying embers of the fire. I saw one of my friends was about to extinguish those remaining embers. I flew into an insane panic. I had to be restrained, but there was no way I was going to allow that fire to go out. I screamed at them to never let the fire go out. Then I remembered the Lord of Voices' words with a chill. "No one knows what's lurking in the dark, do they?" I stayed awake all night and watched the fire, shivering in fear of hearing that voice again. But it never came back. I can still hear it in my mind. What was I talking to? Something older than man? I get goosebumps when I think back to that night in the woods.
This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. My grandfather lives in a mountainous area of the Miyazaki Prefecture. I used to visit him every summer vacation. It was really great. I loved playing in the river by his house, going fishing amongst other things. The summer in question, I had been in the river swimming for about an hour. I started to get cold, so I got out and sat on one of the jutting cliff rocks above the river. I loved it because it was like my own private river, where we never usually had people around. But on that day, I took notice of 2 children about 200 meters away. Even though they were quite far, I was sure that they were elementary school kids like me. I didn't know that there was a school in the area. The only school I knew about was now in ruins. I didn't know about any other kids my age in the area either. It wasn't exactly well populated. They disappeared off in another direction, and I thought I'd better get going soon, as my parents would be looking for me. I was drying myself off and changing back into my clothes when I noticed something nailed to a nearby tree. It was a laminated photo with some text below it. The photo was of a woman and 2 children on either side of her, who appeared to be their mother. Below the photo was only one line of text: "I am looking for these children." I was a bit put off. I felt a bit creeped out by the poster in the mountainous woods. The strangest thing about the poster was the fact that the mother's face had been scribbled over with a black magic marker. The children's faces had been circled in a red marker. Why would the mother's face be blacked out? Surely she would want to be identified if she was the one looking for the children. Something didn't sit right with me about that poster. Weirder still, one of the kids in the poster had a unique hairstyle which made him recognizable, and one of the kids that I saw by the lake today had the same hairstyle. Close cropped shaven hair. Things were weird, and I wanted to leave the area. So I jogged back to my grandfather's house and asked him about the weird poster. He didn't know anything about any missing kids. Strange. The village he lives in is small and close-knit, so the fact that he didn't hear anything about missing kids was certainly surprising. Something seemed wrong. Later in the year, my family went to visit my grandfather again to ring in the new year. He was having a drink and the poster came up in conversation. He said he found something similar to the poster. I was interested but a bit creeped out remembering it. He passed a piece of paper to me. I wondered why he saved it. I was quite curious now. It was the same poster as last time, except this time there was something written over the photo. The word "found" in bright red ink. I was really creeped out by this. I took it to the local temple and the priest said a prayer, just in case. I have no idea if this poster is an innocent thing or something far more sinister. All I know is the kids looked like they were hiding, and there is something dark about the situation. Who puts up a poster in the middle of the woods looking for children without asking the locals and blacking out their mother's picture? Who did they think would see the poster in the woods? Was their mother looking for them? Was it someone else? Were they kids of some cult escapees? I think about this from time to time. I think there might be something going on at that mountain.
I want to tell you a couple stories about when I used to live on the streets as a homeless man. It was hell living on the streets. The stares and the looks of disgust were nothing compared to the violence I endured. I got into an altercation with some guys one night in a park in Tokyo, and I was beaten to within an inch of my life. I had to get out of the area, as I thought they would be back. I remember moving from place to place, and it was all kind of a blur. Somehow, I ended up way up in the sticks, close to the mountains, and eventually I ended up living in an abandoned shrine. It wasn't so bad. I would walk down to the village and exchange my labor for food. You might think that living in an abandoned shrine might be scary, but I can tell you that there was only one thing I was scared of: people. I would offer my services to anyone who had any work available. I like to think of myself as a jack of all trades, an all-rounder. I would often ask people on the street or go door to door trying to drum up some work. One guy asked me what services I could offer. Pretty much anything, I said. He then pulled a gun out, cocked the trigger, and put it against my head. "It's loaded," he said. You can imagine how I felt, right? He put the gun away and said, "I just wanted to point a loaded gun at a human." He then threw some money my way and left. I guess the cash he threw was what he deemed the value of my life to be. Not long after that, a gang found out where I had been living. They came late one night. They found me, and one said a phrase so off-putting, I don't think I'll ever forget it. "You have no human rights." He had already dehumanized me. They carried sticks, iron bars, metal pipes, and they came at me. It was too late to escape. And when they were through, I was left with a broken leg. It was hell. At the same time I experienced such a lack of humanity, I also experienced the opposite. A farmer I had worked for in the village brought food to me when he heard about the gang attack, and he even paid for my hospital bills. If it wasn't for him checking on me, I probably wouldn't have been found, and I might have starved to death in my makeshift home. There would have been no way for me to get down that mountain to the village with a broken leg. I owed that man my life, and I asked if there was any way I could repay him, and he just replied, "Oh hell, why don't you just try and grow some vegetables or something, make yourself a living. Pay me back when you get yourself set up. There's no rush." I learned a lot about agricultural work from him, and when he gave me a method to repay his generosity, I felt like I was still getting more than I was giving. The soil by the shrine was hard, and nothing much would grow. But I was determined to pay him back. I would go to the river countless times a day to fetch water. And eventually, I made some serious progress. This joy was short-lived. A group of people who were into urban exploration came to the abandoned shrine and trashed my little farm. They stomped all over my plans. Why? I had nothing, yet people still wanted to take from me. Something snapped in me. I felt robbed, and I wanted someone to pay for it. I kept a 2x4 with me at all times, and I decided I would be ready for whoever wanted to mess with me. Living this way made me happy. Fight or flight, a return to animal instincts. I grew less trustworthy. I was always scared of spirits or ghosts, but I learned humans are much worse. It was at this point I started to see things. I thought the shrine was haunted. I decided if there was something else there with me in the shrine, I wanted to be of service to the shrine, since the farm wasn't working out. I had learned some carpentry skills when I was younger, and I thought I would try and clean the place up and mend some things. Maybe if the shrine looked a bit more maintained, it would keep the urban explorers and gangs away. Being busy took my mind off my hate for those who sought to hurt me. I started to speak to God, or whatever the spirits that inhabited the shrine were. I would say hello and goodbye, like I was living with them. At first, just to myself, and then quietly out loud. And by the end, I was talking loudly like there was someone else with me. Eventually, the shrine looked pretty good. I started to see the ghost again. She was a beautiful woman, and she was so pleased that I had cleaned up the shrine. She would just sit there and comb her gorgeous hair. Sometimes I wouldn't even hear her. I would just hear some rummaging noises. I felt like I had some company, and I enjoyed it. The gang came back one night. The same gang that attacked me and broke my leg. They laughed at me when I called for help, when I called to her. But they weren't laughing when my friend who owned the farm arrived with his hunting rifle. They never came back after that. Since he saved me again, I decided to stop being so hateful. And I put all that wasted energy into agriculture. I still needed to pay him back, even though he wasn't expecting anything from me. I was determined, and through years of hard work, dedication, and the support of my friend, I managed to hone my skills. I found some land to rent, used it, did well, and I kept repeating this process. Now I own several plots, and I have several employees. I usually offer work to those who are in the same position as me, the homeless. And as for my friend, I've paid him back, don't worry. I bought him several plots of land by the mountains. Finding a partner hasn't really worked out for me, but whenever I am down, I seem to dream about the spirit of the woman in the shrine. Sometimes I think I was rescued by someone other than just my farm friend. So my next project is restoring the shrine to its former glory and reinstating a priest there.
This happened in 2009, when I was fishing in the summer. It was an area with steep hills and cliff faces. It seemed like the place where locals wouldn't pass through, as it was a bit of a trek to get there. It is said that the river is home to big game fish, and it was really secluded. It was the weekend, and I imagined there to be a couple of other people there, but I was delighted to find that I was the only person pitched up on the lake. After setting up my tent, I cooked a little and then went off to sleep in my sleeping bag. It was nighttime when I arrived, and I planned on getting an early start to fishing at daybreak. I was having a perfectly sound night of sleep until I heard this horrible loud noise. It shocked me out of sleep. I opened my eyes immediately. I didn't know where I was for a second. I hate that feeling. I couldn't hear that strange sound anymore. But my tent was shaking. A quick glance at my watch told me it was 2 a.m. I told myself in my half-asleep state to remain calm and composed. I thought, wow, maybe this is that sleep paralysis I've heard about. I considered that might be happening, or I was suffering from some sort of auditory hallucination. But this seemed too real. This was no sleep paralysis, I realized with a shudder. Another possibility crossed my mind, a rock fall. but I remember checking the cliff before I pitched up my tent. It wasn't all that rocky. The soil was hard and dry too, since it was summer. But this wasn't an impossibility. I didn't think that it could be a human in the middle of the night outside my tent. That thought was too terrifying to consider in the dark alone, so I tried to think of other possibilities. Because I was working myself up a little and getting frightened, I knew I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep, so I turned on the light in my tent, which put me at ease a little bit, but I didn't feel like going outside the tent to check. I told myself not to worry, and soon it would be bright outside and I'll be fishing. Just as I was calming myself down, I heard something outside. It was quiet for a moment, until I heard another sound. It sounded like someone wailing, moaning, groaning, whatever. I felt as if I was going to pass out from the fear. On the other hand, I was thinking, it's a bit lighter now. What if it's a person, and they need help or something? I was worried for whoever might be out there, so I decided to leave my tent. Just as I reached for the tent zip, the moaning got louder. I paused for a moment. Cold sweat teemed from my brow. I could see something outside, the other side of the tent. A dark, hulking shadow. Now I was certain that someone was out there. I grabbed my torch and my frying pan as a weapon, and I pulled the zipper down and decided to face whoever was messing with me. I leaned out and looked around. I scanned everywhere. There was no one around. I could see a fishing boat in the distance, but that was all. I couldn't see the owner of that shadow that darkened my tent. It was deathly silent. It was truly terrifying. I withdrew into the tent. If you think about it, the tent was illuminated by my torch from the inside, so I shouldn't really be able to see a shadow outside due to the light. It was absolutely unexplainable. I turned the radio on to calm myself. I was shivering in my tent, trying not to think about what had just happened. After a while, I listened to the DJ chatting in between tracks. I was slowly regaining some composure. The roof of the tent collapsed in. It hit the ground, accompanied with some horrendous sound. This time I knew it was no dream or hallucination. The roof of the tent was utterly destroyed. Moreover, it hurt me badly as it crashed in. I felt totally helpless, and I'm not ashamed to admit this. I broke down, and I just cried and cried. I vowed to go home without doing any fishing as soon as the sun came up. The moaning sound outside persisted. There was a new sound now. It sounded like something dragging across the ground, or crawling perhaps. I don't know why, but I turned the radio up to its maximum volume. When daybreak finally came, it was like seeing God or something. I was so relieved. The sun was up, and now I could see everything around me. I went out of the tent and looked around the area. There were beer cans, bottles, and flowers scattered around. I hurriedly folded up the remnants of my busted tent and stopped in my tracks when I realized that there was blood outside of the tent, as if someone had smeared it there. Above, on the cliffs, there was probably a road at some point. I wondered if there had been an accident there. Maybe someone had passed away in the area I set up camp, perhaps due to the nature of their death. They became that horrible thing that tormented me. I didn't know what else I could offer as an explanation. Or perhaps there was some sort of creature out there. But I don't know anything in nature that would do that. I didn't know what else to do, so I offered my remaining juice to whatever spirit might be around. I left it as an offering to ease their passing, and wished them happiness in the next life. I choose to believe that it was a spirit, because the reality of some people or a person out there messing with me in the dead of night is too terrifying to consider. Thank you all so much for listening. I am really happy to share some creepy stories that you might not have heard. These Japanese stories were translated by myself, and you can find more on my channel, so please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this.
I like to think that you will find stories that you probably haven't heard before there. I like to try different types of stories between human horror and the unknown. I'm always interested and open to suggestions, and I love chatting in the comments. Big thank you to Mortis Media. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you, as well as being introduced to your audience. Thank you all.